Next story is really bizarre. It is one that I came across years and years ago. And it's funny because I used to just research weird events, and I'd get books, I read websites, and I kind of bookmark stuff. And that was just kind of it. I would just research it and then call it a day. And as I started doing this podcast, I've been going back through some of my old bookmarks. I came across this story, and it still surprised me. I was still like, that's absolutely impossible. So this story's back from 2011. So it's, quite old, news-wise. So in South Korea, they found this man crucified. And crucified in the traditional way. His feet were nailed to the bottom of the cross. His hands were nailed to the cross. He had a rope around his neck, and he had a mirror. Oh, and he had a crown of thorns, just like Jesus did in the imagery. He had a crown of thorns on. He had a stab wound in his stomach, where the Romans stabbed Jesus. And there was a mirror in front of his face. Oh, and there was 2 smaller crosses on the side. Those were empty. But anyway, so some guy finds it, and he goes back, he hoofs off, calls the cops. The cops show up, and they're looking around, and they see all this stuff. They're like, okay, yeah, there's his feet, nailed to that, and the stab wound. And the mirror was in his face so he could look at his own suffering. And I'm reading this. I remember reading the article years ago and being like, oh, man, that's super brutal. And then I was reading it again last week, and I'm like, oh, man, that's awful. Like, was it like a drug deal gone wrong? Was it like some sort of Asian mafia sending a message? You get to the last sentence in the article, it says, police still aren't sure if this case was a homicide or a suicide. And I'm like, how do you crucify yourself? How do you commit suicide via crucifixion? I know there's some crazy ways you can kill yourself, but that's... Wait for that dog to pass. Oh, I must have psychic powers right when I said that. Oh, well, maybe I don't. That's the way people usually come up. They say they have psychic powers. They just think something and something happens, and then they're like, I'm gifted. Anyways, so... It's 107. I can't shut the windows. That's the problem. But I'm not going to worry about it. He's a happy little puppy. He can bark all he wants. I don't care. Anyway, so I read this article and I was like, okay, this happened in 2011. They have to have some sort of resolution to this by now. And the cops did finally rule he killed himself. And they actually had to put on a presentation to prove, because no one would believe, how do you kill yourself via crucifixion? So the police reenacted it. Listen to what this guy did. So apparently he was this hyper-religious guy. And before he ended up in the quarry, where they found the crucifix, he had emptied his bank account. He had they found notes about his crucifixion. He canceled his mobile phone contract, according to this. Now, of course, you could always say someone made him all do that to kill him and all that stuff. But the cops were actually able to figure out how he did this. So they said that, and this might sound a little extreme and go, well, that sounds ridiculous, but this is the cops' hypothesis. So he nailed his own feet to the cross first. Okay. Then he lifted his back up and put the rope is hanging off the cross already. He put his head in the rope. Now, Jesus didn't have a rope around his neck, but it takes quite a few days to actually die of crucifixion. I think he was just speeding that process up. Anyways, then he stabs himself in the side. So his feet are nailed to the crucifix. He puts his head in the rope. He stabs himself in the side. Oh, man, this sucks. And then he drilled holes in his hands, and there was already nails in the cross, and he lifted his hands up and pushed the nail-like head through his hand and got them both in there, and then just slumped. And they died of a combination of blood loss and suffocation, because when you're crucified, even without the rope, you can't hold up. Jesus wasn't crucified through his hands, by the way. That's a misnomer. He was crucified through his wrists. But what happens is when you crucify people, we know this scientifically, your body will slump and your head will kind of push down into your chest and you can't breathe. So you lift yourself up to get a couple more breaths, but you have really no upper body strength. It's not like these people are Arnold Schwarzenegger and they start to slump again and they start to not breathe again. You do that for about 2 or 3 days and you die. A couple hours depending on I guess your lung capacity. So it's a very torturous way to die. Can you imagine back in the day, they talk about these accounts where people would travel down roads and they would just be crucified soldiers, like crucified prisoners, lining the road. I mean, we complain if we go to Cancun and there's a head in the pool. Could you imagine going to Bulgaria and there's 500 people crucified and you're like, this isn't where I want to be right now. That was just, and you would just be like, oh, something must have happened here. Well, I still got to go do business in this town. I know it's bizarre, but you just see that, and you can't help them. You can't help them, because then you'll end up on there. So anyways, yeah, there was a suicide, apparently. And again, it's possible that this guy was murdered, and this was all an attempt to cover it up. But the neighbors were like, he was super religious. It didn't really shock anybody. He made the plans. If there's a will, there's a way, as grim as that sounds. If you want to crucify yourself, you will plan out how to... And that probably helped them, too, where they found how he planned. They found notes on his crucifixion. The police would probably be able to go, okay, that's how he got his hands nailed into the cross. He drilled his hands beforehand. The nails were already there, and he just hoisted it over. Ugh. You know, at some point, I'm sure he totally regretted doing that. I mean, he could have been caught up in some whole religious fervor, but after, like, hour 4, he may have been like, I'll never see Big Bang Theory again. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.